I was 18 when I fell in love with my math teacher. I didn't expect it. Not that year. Not with him. At 18, you think you've seen enough to know what love is. You think it'll come with fireworks, with wild passion, or someone your own age who looks at you across a party and smiles like the world is about to begin. But love, real love, sometimes walks in wearing a button-down shirt, holding a stack of textbooks, and asking you gently if you're okay after class. This is the story of how I fell in love with someone I was never supposed to fall for. My math teacher. It wasn't a game. It wasn't a fantasy. It was something so quiet, so honest, and so unexpected that by the time I realized what was happening, my heart was already his. Not for what he looked like, but for how he saw me. Not as just another student, but as someone who had something to say, even when I didn't know how to say it out loud. This is not a story about breaking rules. This is a story about finding something rare, something gentle, in the most impossible place. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapters of this unforgettable journey. The first time I really noticed him, was a Thursday morning, second period, math class. I was seated by the window like always, pretending to care about whatever chapter we were on. The light through the glass was hitting my notebook at just the right angle to make the ink shimmer a little. Funny the things your mind focuses on when it wants to be anywhere but where you are. Then he walked in. Mr. Emerson. I'd seen him before, of course. He wasn't new. He'd been teaching Algebra 2 since the beginning of the semester, always punctual, always dressed the same, simple button-downs, dark jeans, clean sneakers. Nothing flashy. His hair was sandy brown and always slightly messy, like he'd been running his hand through it between classes. And he wore these quiet wire-rimmed glasses that made him look thoughtful, kind. Young, too. Maybe late 20s, early 30s at most. But that day, maybe it was the light. Maybe it was the silence he carried when he stepped into the room. I just saw him differently. He looked right at me when he walked past my desk, nodding slightly with that small, polite smile he always gave. It lasted maybe a second, but something inside me reacted. My chest tightened. I felt warm and cold at the same time. And I hated how obvious it must have been because I immediately looked down at my notebook like it had just become the most interesting thing in the world. I told myself I was being ridiculous. He was just a teacher, my teacher. But from that moment on, something shifted. I started listening more, not to the equations, not really, but to him. The way he explained things with calm precision. The way he paused when he thought we weren't understanding and tried again, gentler. The way he never made anyone feel stupid. There was something about him that made people relax. Even the students who usually hated math, they listened. Because he never raised his voice, never lost patience. He just had this quiet presence that made the whole classroom feel safe. And somehow that made me want to be near him more than I wanted to admit. I started arriving to class early, just to hear him shuffle through his bag or hum to himself when he thought no one else was there. I'd ask him small questions after the bell. Half of them I already knew the answers to. I just wanted to stay a little longer, to watch the way his eyes lit up when he explained something, how he'd adjust his glasses when he was thinking. Sometimes he'd lean just slightly closer when showing me a solution, and I'd catch the scent of his cologne. Something faint, clean, subtle like him. It made my stomach twist in a way I didn't know how to name. Still, I kept telling myself it was just admiration, respect, the way you look up to someone older and smarter. It was easier than admitting the truth, but it got harder to ignore. Like the day I caught him watching me from across the room while everyone else was busy working. Just for a second. Our eyes met. He blinked, and then he looked away. But I saw something unsure, curious, like he'd been thinking too hard. And then came that Friday. It was after school. I'd stayed late in the library, and when I left, it was nearly empty. As I walked past his classroom, I noticed the light was still on. I paused. My footsteps slowed. And then, his voice. "Hey, you all right?" I turned to see him leaning against the doorway, arms crossed casually, those warm eyes on me again. There was no one else around. The hallway was quiet. Just us. I nodded. "Yeah, just heading out." He tilted his head slightly. "You seem distracted lately." I laughed, trying to keep it light. "Guess math's just not my thing." He smiled, but there was a softness in it that caught me off guard. "I think you're better at it than you let yourself believe." Something about the way he said it made my chest ache, like he wasn't just talking about equations. Then he stepped aside, motioning toward the open door. "You want to come in for a second? I can show you a trick that might help with the quadratic stuff." I stared at him, frozen in place. And that's when I realized this was more than just school. This was a door, and I didn't know yet if I was brave enough to walk through it. I stepped into the classroom. His classroom. There were no other students, no echo of hallway footsteps, no leftover papers rustling on desks, just the soft hum of the ceiling lights and the way my own heartbeat seemed to fill the silence. Mr. Emerson walked to the front of the room and picked up a marker. "This'll only take a minute," he said, already drawing something on the whiteboard. "I just thought, maybe if I explained it this way, it'd make more sense." I nodded, sitting down in the front row, not where I usually sat, closer than I'd ever been. He started working through the problem, his voice calm and patient, like always. But something was different now, or maybe it was me. I couldn't stop looking at his hands, the way his fingers gripped the marker with such ease, how he'd rest the cap against his chin when he paused to think, or the way he'd occasionally glance at me over his shoulder to make sure I was following along. And each time he did, I had to look away. Quickly. Not because I was confused about the math, because I was confused about everything else. He finished the problem, capped the marker, and turned to face me. "That make more sense?" "Yeah," I said, a little too quickly. He smiled, leaning against the desk. "You pick things up fast when you're not second-guessing yourself. You know that, right?" I looked at him, unsure what to say. Compliments always felt strange, especially from him. "I guess I've been distracted," I admitted. He nodded slowly, like he already knew. "Anything you want to talk about?" And for a second, just 1 second, I thought about telling him, about saying, "I think about you too much. I can't sleep some nights because I keep replaying the way you smiled at me last week. I keep wondering if you see me the same way I'm starting to see you." But I didn't say that. I just shook my head. He watched me for a moment. "You ever feel like there's something you can't explain? Like something's growing inside you and you're afraid to say it out loud?" The question hit so close to home I almost laughed. Or cried. I couldn't tell which. "Yeah," I answered. "All the time." He nodded again. But then, something in his expression shifted, like a thought had passed through him that he didn't want to let out. He turned toward his desk and grabbed a folder. I stood up, pretending I didn't feel every nerve in my body buzzing. As I reached the door, he called out behind me, "Hey!" I turned. Mr. Emerson looked at me, his voice softer than before. "For what it's worth, I think it's okay to not have everything figured out yet." I smiled faintly, not trusting my voice. He held my gaze a moment longer, then, "See you Monday." "Yeah." See you. That weekend, I thought about him more than I wanted to. I replayed everything. His words, his tone, the pause in his eyes before he spoke, the way he asked if I wanted to talk, the way he seemed like he understood, like he knew something he wasn't allowed to say. It wasn't just me, was it? Couldn't be. By Sunday night, I'd almost convinced myself that I was imagining everything, that I'd misread the moment, that the warmth in his eyes was just kindness, that the silence between us was just silence. But Monday morning, everything changed again. I was walking through the parking lot before school when I saw him. Not alone. He was standing by his car, talking to someone. A man. Older, tall, with salt and pepper hair and a confident posture. They were close. Too close. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the way the man touched his shoulder, brief, gentle, like he'd done it 100 times before, made something twist in my stomach. Then Mr. Emerson turned, and for a split second, our eyes met across the lot. He didn't smile. He didn't look away either. He just held my gaze. And for the first time, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. Was it guilt? Was it confusion? Or was it a warning? The rest of Monday dragged like wet cement. I kept thinking about that man, the one who touched Mr. Emerson's shoulder like he knew him, intimately. And I kept thinking about the way Mr. Emerson looked at me afterward. Not startled, not cold, but distant. As if he was building a wall between us, brick by brick, with just his eyes. I sat through his class like a shadow of myself, staring at the board but not seeing the numbers. My notes were a mess. My heart wasn't in it. He didn't call on me once, even though he usually did. Not even a glance. I told myself to stop being ridiculous, to stop reading into things. But it's hard to unsee what you've already seen. That night, I barely slept. I replayed every word we'd exchanged in his classroom the week before. Every silence, every look, and now, every doubt. Was I just some foolish kid letting a crush spiral into fantasy? Or was there something real that neither of us had the courage to name? 2 days passed. Then came Wednesday. Rain had poured down all morning, turning the campus sidewalks into shiny mirrors. At the end of class, most students rushed to get out before the next downpour hit. I stayed behind. I didn't even know why. Maybe I just wanted to see if he'd say something. A word, a glance, anything. I was stuffing my notebook into my bag when I felt a presence behind me. "You're not usually this quiet," he said. His voice was calm, like always, but quieter this time. Closer. I turned to face him. Mr. Emerson stood just a few feet away, leaning slightly on the edge of his desk, arms crossed. "Guess I've had a lot on my mind," I answered. He nodded slowly. "I noticed." There was a beat of silence. "I saw you the other morning," I said before I could stop myself. "In the parking lot." His jaw tightened just enough for me to see it. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "That was a friend." The way he said the word made it feel like it had been rehearsed, or at least carefully chosen. "You seemed close." He met my gaze then, and for the first time, he didn't look away. "We were," he said softly. "Once." That silence came back again, thick and loaded. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to know more. But at the same time, I didn't want to push him away. He moved toward the window, watching the rain. "You ever feel like your life split into 2 versions of you?" he asked. "The one you are, and the one you're still afraid to be?" That question didn't sound like it came from a teacher. It sounded like it came from someone who had been hurt. Someone still trying to heal. "All the time," I answered. He turned slightly. That's not something you hear many 18-year-olds say. I think I've always felt a little older than I should. He smiled faintly. Yeah, I can tell. I don't know what happened after that. Maybe it was the way the rain softened the room. Maybe it was the way we were standing, too close now, the space between us humming like static. But then it happened. He reached forward, slowly, and touched my arm. Just his fingers. Barely there, but enough to make my breath catch, enough to freeze the world around us. And then he pulled back. I shouldn't have done that, he said, his voice barely audible. But you did, I replied. He looked at me, really looked at me. This isn't easy, you know that, right? I nodded. Nothing worth feeling ever is. He glanced down, then back at me. You should go. I didn't move. Please, he added. Before I do something else I can't take back. My heart was beating so fast I thought he could hear it. I turned and walked to the door. Just before I stepped out, I looked over my shoulder. He was still standing there, staring at the floor like he'd just broken a rule that wasn't written anywhere, but meant everything. And I knew then. Something between us had changed forever. By Friday, everything felt different. We hadn't spoken since that moment in his classroom. That touch. That pause. That space between us that somehow felt both terrifying and sacred. But we also hadn't looked at each other the same. I could feel it when I walked into the room. His eyes found mine, then looked away too fast. I caught myself staring at him during class, and this time, he didn't stop me. But silence doesn't stay quiet forever, not in high school. It started in the lunchroom. I was standing in line with my tray when I heard my name behind me. He's the one who's always hanging around Mr. Emerson, right? I froze. A second voice, laughing. Yeah, he's probably getting extra credit in private. The words stabbed straight through my chest. My stomach flipped. My face burned. I didn't even turn to see who said it. I just walked out, left the tray, the line, everything. The hallway felt cold, too bright, too loud. I kept walking until I found an empty stairwell and sat down, heart pounding. They didn't know anything, but they had seen something. Or maybe they were just guessing. Sometimes that's all it takes for a rumor to catch fire. I didn't even realize I was gripping the straps of my backpack like I was trying to hold myself together. I skipped the rest of the day. That evening, I got a message. Unknown number. I heard something today. Are you okay? I stared at the screen. I knew it was him. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know how. What was I supposed to say? Yeah, I'm fine, just overheard people joking that I'm sleeping with my teacher. Totally normal Friday. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I finally typed, They're talking. You didn't do anything wrong, I'll stay out of your way. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. You didn't do anything wrong either. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I turned my phone off. The weekend was a blur of silence. I didn't leave the house, didn't check my messages. I kept thinking about the look on his face when he touched me, the way he pulled back like he was afraid, not of me, but of himself, of what it meant. And now the world around us had started watching. By Monday morning, I felt like everyone knew something. The hallways buzzed quieter when I passed. People stared too long. Some smirked. Some didn't look at me at all. It was amazing how quickly everything could shift, how invisible rules were suddenly being enforced by people who didn't even understand what they were judging. When I walked into his class, it was like walking into a cage made of glass. He looked up, and for the first time, he looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. The room filled with chatter, shuffling, notebooks slamming on desks. He waited for silence, Then he said, "Pop quiz today." Everyone groaned. He handed out papers, walking row by row, not looking at me once. When he reached my desk, he paused ever so slightly. Our fingers brushed when he handed me the quiz. It was brief, but it was everything. I stared down at the questions, but my mind couldn't focus. Not on numbers, not on anything but the heaviness sitting in my chest. When the bell rang, I stayed in my seat. He looked at me, the classroom already half empty. "I can't talk here," he said, his voice low. "Not now." "I know," I replied. He stepped closer, quiet, intentional. "This isn't fair to you." I swallowed. "I don't care about fair. I care about real." His jaw clenched. "That's what scares me." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. I grabbed my backpack and left. And the moment the door shut behind me, I realized something. I wasn't just falling for him anymore. I had already fallen, and I didn't know if he'd ever be allowed to catch me. He called my name as I passed him in the hallway. It was after school. The halls were quiet. His voice sounded different, bare, almost cracked. "Wait!" I stopped, turned around. He was standing outside his classroom door, his tie loosened, eyes tired like he hadn't slept in days. "Can you come in for a second?" I stepped inside. He closed the door behind me gently, like he was afraid of the sound. He didn't speak at first, just walked to the window and stared out into the fading sky. Then, without turning around, he said, "You deserve someone who can love you without hiding." I stayed frozen. "And what about you?" He finally looked at me. A pause. His voice dropped. "I think I'm already doing it." My chest went tight. He stepped closer, just a little, like gravity pulled him forward. "But if I let this out, I lose everything." "You won't lose me," I said. He smiled, but it was the kind that came with pain. "That's what I'm afraid of." I left the room with those words in my ears. My heart didn't know if it was flying or falling. 2 weeks later, he resigned. There was no announcement, no explanation, just an email from the administration, personal reasons. I waited after school that day. I knew he'd come by to pack his things. When he saw me, he didn't speak. He just walked up, held my gaze, and took a small envelope from his coat pocket. Inside was a letter. I didn't read it until I got home. It said, "You were the one thing that felt real in a world where everything else had to be hidden. Don't ever think I left because of you. I left because I finally wanted to choose you, and I couldn't do it halfway." The last line broke me. Maybe one day we'll find each other again. Somewhere we're allowed to exist. And now I carry that day with me, not as a wound, but as proof that even in silence, love can still echo. If this story touched you, take a moment to think. What are you still afraid to feel? What are you holding back just to stay safe? Sometimes love doesn't fit the rules. Sometimes it just asks for your truth. If you believe in stories like this, raw, tender, honest, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this with someone who needs to know they're not alone.